Across this channel, I have covered many young adult dystopians from my childhood. The Hunger Games, The Selection, Divergent, The Maze Runner. And recently I realized that the only of these series that I've liked upon my reread is The Hunger Games. But that doesn't exactly capture it. I always like book 1. The Maze Runner and Divergent first books got 3 stars from me, and The Selection's first book got 4 stars. But all 3 started to veer off the rails in book 2, and by the end of book 3, I found myself very frustrated with them. And once I started thinking about it, I realized that it's hard for me to think of another dystopian series besides The Hunger Games that I think is really well done and well written all the way through. I'm sure that they exist, it's just that maybe all of the examples that I've read, it seems to be more the norm than not that the series goes off the rails at some point. I could list plenty of dystopian standalones I really liked, but not series. And it got me thinking, why is it so hard to write a good dystopian trilogy? So today I thought it would be fun to look at these 4 series as a whole and discuss why I think 3 of the 4 of them really went off the rails. Spoiler warning though, I will just be openly talking about what happens in all 4 of them. I'm not going to be giving individual spoiler warnings as we go because I just think it would get too arduous and annoying for even you, the viewer. So I think that this just won't be the video for you, unfortunately, if you don't want something spoiled in these series. I want to start by defining what dystopian means for the context of this video, because dystopian can be meshed with a lot of other genres, namely sci-fi and fantasy. And for me, I think this problem really lies when people are doing true dystopians that don't really have a fantasy or sci-fi element. Interestingly, every once in a while when I make these videos, I get a comment from somebody about how it's dystopia instead of dystopian. So we are going to start with a little bit of a high school essay looking at the dictionary definition of things, because according to Merriam-Webster, a dystopia is an imagined world or society in which people lead wretched, dehumanized, or fearful lives. Where dystopian is of relating to or being an imagined world or society in which people lead dehumanized, fearful lives, relating to or characteristic of a dystopia. And the first example they have of it in a sentence is dystopian novel. Dystopia is what you call the actual society itself, but dystopian is the name of the genre. So when you hear me use those words, that's what I mean by them. And again, for me, this is like without any fantasy elements, without any sci-fi elements, and really keeping it stripped to dystopian. I specifically have noticed this problem with real world dystopian. I don't find that a dystopian fantasy series is as difficult to get right. And I don't think they run into a lot of the same problems that just a pure dystopian does. So why do I think it's so difficult? Well, I've already shared with you that I think that it only really works if the author has something to say, TM, about society. I have gotten some pushback on that take over the years, but I would and am going to spend today arguing that in order for it to be good, there has to be some element of social commentary, even if it's not the core element or the focus. If the dystopia element takes a back seat, that's fine, but you still need to have some kind of perspective on society driving how you form that dystopia, or it's just not going to work. Because I think it's super easy to fall into this trap of government that is evil just for the sake of being evil. Close your eyes. Imagine an evil society. Cool. Now imagine one that could actually exist in real life. It's much harder to do. In my opinion, in order for a dystopian to have any power over the reader, it has to be something that you could imagine happening in real life. A lot of the time they're turned up to 11, they're really extreme, and maybe it would never reach that extreme in the real world, but it still is an extreme of a version of a government you could imagine in our world. And to me, I think there's 2 big whys that you need. You have to understand why that government is doing what they're doing. What do they get out of it? Because evil rarely exists in our world for no reason. That doesn't justify it, it just explains its existence. But typically the individuals in government are getting something out of the government being evil. And ultimately the power is always with the people. This is where I think the best dystopian typically makes its commentary is in how the few control the many, because people will revolt eventually, and if there are more people who are revolting than there are people in government, then usually those revolutions work, at least eventually. And so why aren't the people revolting? What is their reason for going along with what the government is doing? And This is just my opinion, but in my opinion, if you don't have a really good reason why the government's doing what they're doing and why the people are going along with it, then I just think the dystopian has no power, at least over me as a reader. You're not going to scare me because I can't imagine this actually happening. It's completely fantastical. And maybe that's part of why I don't really feel like fantasy has this problem, because I couldn't really figure that out for myself. And so I was just kind of going to let it be like, why don't I think fantasy has the issue? But maybe because there's other things about fantasy that is fantastical, it's easier for me to ignore if the government feels fantastical to me too. I don't know. You guys probably know where I'm going with this if you've watched a lot of my content, but I feel like the Maze Runner breaks this just immediately. Part of me doesn't want to talk too much about it because I have talked about it so much over the course of those videos, but some people might be watching it who haven't watched those. What's happening within the Maze Runner is that the government released a virus for population control that they didn't have a cure for, that makes people really violent and kill each other, and they're trying to form a cure, and so they've put a bunch of kids into a maze to study their brainwaves to try and help them create a cure, because those kids are immune to the virus, and so they're trying to figure out why. Now, apparently Dashner retcons some of this in the prequel series that I have not read yet and am planning to, but you'll notice across these videos today, we're going to run into some other places where people have retconned stuff. I'm not talking about retcons. To me, if it got retconned, then that shows that it's not only me that saw a problem with it, and so it more to me is a confirmation that the commentary is fair than it is like, oh, well, they ended up fixing it, so why are you even talking about it? Especially because they fix it in later books. This is a side tangent, but it's one of my pet peeves on book internet, is when you'll say, ugh, you run into this problem in book 2 in this series, and then someone says, well, but they fixed that in book 4. Okay, first of all, I'm a book reviewer, so I'm reviewing the book that's right in front of me, and the problem exists in this book, even if it gets fixed later. And 2, then you have to read all the way to that point with the issue. So again, with the Maze Runner, it's like if you have to get all the way to the prequels and then read the prequels to find the solution, then anyway, it doesn't matter. In this case, the retcon was needed because who in their right mind would release a virus that you don't have a cure for that makes people go crazy and get violent? Like, he had to retcon that because who would do that? That's so stupid. But also, the reason why the maze exists makes no sense whatsoever beyond just their studying them. Some solar flares destroyed a large section of the Earth's ecosystem, and so they don't believe that we have enough resources to support all of the people on Earth. So they claim it's because they were trying to avoid famine and war, and that while this is barbaric, it causes less suffering. But the solar flares would have depleted the Earth's resources. So one of the things I kept harping on over the course of this series is that all of the experiments they're running are incredibly resource heavy, and it just doesn't really seem like an organization that's entirely focused on fixing this problem would be doing that. There's a lot easier and less resource heavy ways. By resource, I mean like electricity, food, water, things like that, that you could put these kids under stress and study their brainwaves and not have had to waste all those resources on running this experiment. And so I just found a lot of it to be very far-fetched. I will admit, though, upon thinking about this for this video, while I do think the why behind why the government does what they do doesn't make any sense, I do actually think they have their second why as to why the people went along with it. Because when you get to the end of the series and you see the people who are actually living in this society, living in an enclosed city, and how scared they are of contracting this virus, as you can imagine, right? I would be, certainly. It's the same organization that's protecting the city from infection that is running these experiments. And so if you're very scared for yourself and your family and your lives, and you know you're being protected by this organization, then why would you question what they say they're doing to try and find a cure? So I actually do think they have the why as to why the people go along with it, but I don't really think they have the why as to why the government did it in the first place. Next, let's look at Divergent. Divergent has 2 layered dystopias, a Russian nesting doll of dystopia, if you will. The first is inside the city that the first 2 books take place in, Chicago, and the world that Tris gets born into, where they have 5 factions and you grow up in a faction, but when you turn 16, you can pick to switch to a different one or stay in the one you're in. And once you choose, that's the faction you're in, and you don't get to choose another one. And so if you don't fit in, then you end up factionless. And all 5 factions prioritize a specific personality trait. In book 1, Tris chooses Dauntless, and the whole book is about her initiation. And at the end, another faction pulls a coup, and all of book 2 is about them managing this coup and this fighting inside their city. And the plot twist at the end of book 2 is very similar to the plot twist in The Maze Runner, which is that, oh my god, this was all an experiment, and it turns out there's a whole world outside the wall and outside the city of Chicago. Can you believe it? And they go outside, and then there's a second dystopia. And to me, that is really where the problems arise. So essentially, the reason why they set up the cities with the factions is because many, many years ago in America, they tried to do genetic mutations to improve the population, but they take a few generations to really take hold. But then they realized that the genetic mutations actually damaged people. At least that's what they say. And that idea of if you have too much of a good thing, you have to sacrifice something else, and that balance really is the key. If you're too logical, then you're missing your compassion. If you're too compassionate, then sometimes you're being illogical. If you're too brave, then you can be reckless. You get what I'm saying, right? This leads to a war that canonically kills half the population of America. So then they sequester all of the genetically damaged people into these cities to go in and fix their genes. But again, it takes a few generations to really take hold. So they're running these experiments in these cities until the divergent appear. And divergent are essentially genetically healed people who are balanced in their personality traits. And so it feels like the point is that too much of a good thing can become a bad thing, and balance is important. Okay, but that makes sense. And this is a video about dystopians that don't really work, so there has to be some kind of plot twist. Where am I going with this? The plot twist is that Veronica Roth abandons this as a message for the series in book 3 and completely pivots to trying to talk about everything else but that. The people of this society are told that when there was no genetic mutation, there was complete peace, no violence, no war. And that it was the mutation that caused violence and caused war. And so the experiments are keeping the peace until everything's fixed. And this does lead to some discrimination against genetically damaged people because not all of them live in the cities with the experiments. So then Tris finds out that this isn't exactly true, as we know, and that war and violence definitely existed before. And also that big war actually happened because the genetically pure people were discriminating against the genetically damaged people. So what does that make our first why, I should say, why the government does what they do? Actually, Roth confronts this directly on page 252. Class, turn to page. There's a character named Nita that Tris is talking to in the moment, and they're discussing this. So, Nita demands, incredulous, if genetically pure people caused war and total devastation in the past at the same magnitude that genetically damaged people supposedly do now, then what's the basis for thinking that we need to spend so many resources and so much time working to correct genetic damage? What's the use of experiments at all except to convince the right people that the government is doing something to make all of our lives better, even though it's not? And then later in the conversation, why? Why spend so much time and energy fighting something that isn't really a problem? I demand, suddenly frustrated. Well, the people fighting it now probably fight it because they have been taught that it is a problem. That's another thing that Rafi showed me. Examples of propaganda the government released about genetic damage, Nita says. But initially, I don't know. It's probably a dozen things. Prejudice against GDs, control, maybe. Control the genetically damaged population by teaching them that there's something wrong with them, and control the genetically pure population by teaching them they're healed and whole. These things don't happen overnight, and they don't happen for just one reason. It's so unbelievably funny. They've been spreading lies and propaganda to distract us by making us hate a specific population instead of realizing what the real problems are. Why would they do such a thing? I don't know. Probably has something to do with control. Like, what? Anyway. Okay, so the government wants to keep control of the people, and they're going for the classic give them a good energy approach. Got it. If we turn to page 269, Nita says the government has been threatening to shut down the experiments for almost a year now. The experiments keep falling apart because the communities can't live in peace, and David keeps finding ways to restore peace just in the nick of time. And if anything else goes wrong in Chicago, he can do it again. He can reset all the experiments at any time. So wait a minute. The government is doing the experiments because they want to control the population via the experiments, or the government wants to shut the experiments down, and so the person running the experiments is trying to salvage them by doing a bunch of shitty stuff to the people in the experiments. So which is it? And I know that in our kind of answer, it was like, well, probably initially they were doing it for control, but now people are just doing it because they've been taught it's necessary. I don't really think is enough to explain how barbaric this is, especially when it's been like over 100 years that they've been doing this canonically. I just feel like that contradicts itself. But even say we were going to give that to her, okay? Then what's the message here? That discrimination is bad? Okay, cool, I can get on board with that. But if it's just that the genetically damaged people are being discriminated against and they actually aren't any more violent as the genetically pure people, what happened to all of that about too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing? So we have just completely abandoned that, and that's not a message of this anymore, and I guess too much of a good thing is fine. We don't need balance, actually. But in that instance, then why, even in a manufactured environment, are they struggling to keep peace for more than like a decade or two canonically? Like, we find out that they keep having to reset everybody's memories, like multiple times within their own lives sometimes, in order to keep the peace in these societies. So what's the message there? That human beings are completely incapable of living in any peace whatsoever? Because I don't think that's true at all. Do you have the occasional people that can be violent? Yes. You're never really going to be able to completely eradicate that. But a society can overall be fairly peaceful. I do think human beings are capable of that. And so it's just crazy because it's like, well, what's the message here? Like, if the genetically damaged people actually aren't more violent, then again, we've completely abandoned the too much of a good thing is bad. And we've also sort of stumbled into a message where peace is impossible, apparently. Like, it kind of actually feels like the point of some of this is what President Snow's perspective on the world is, which is that peace is only possible when it's created with an iron fist. And not only that, but they didn't do the factions right at first, so you can't blame it on the faction system. When they first started the experiments, the factions had the best outcomes at keeping the society peaceful, and so they started doing the factions everywhere. And not only that, but then at the end of the book, this is something that I complained about a lot when I talked about it. Essentially, the Bureau wants to wipe the memories of everyone in Chicago, and Tris and friends feel like this is functionally killing everybody in Chicago because you're destroying the person that those memories created and basically resetting them from scratch. And so even though they're technically still living, you're functionally killing them. And so their plan is to actually pull an Uno reverse card and wipe the memories of everybody at the Bureau, functionally killing them. And they claim that it's okay when they do it because they're trying to get rid of bias. But then when somebody in narrative tells Tris, the people of Chicago might have trouble adjusting to our society because they're so used to the faction system, she's like, well, everybody's capable of learning, so the ends do justify the means. Killing people is fine if I do it. Is that the message? Also, that's just at the Bureau, so how does this fix the bias within the overall society? So what I'm saying here is, actually everything in this book lines up so much better and makes so much more sense if Roth had kept the original message of the series to be the overarching message, that too much of a good thing can become a bad thing, and so we need balance. And so it would follow that the genetically damaged people actually do struggle to have a peaceful society at a higher rate than the genetically pure people. But if all of that is true, then that frames the government as actually kind of a good actor doing the best they can in a bad situation, trying to help these people instead of just wiping them out. But we can't have that, because then who's the big bad for Tris to fight in book 3? So then she had to figure out a reason why the Bureau doing what they're doing was wrong. And so she came up with this, and that frustrates me because there actually is a conversation to be had about agency here. Do people have a right to be crazy? That is a real world question that has real world applications. If you know that somebody isn't in the right state of mind, do they still have a right to agency to decide to keep themselves in that situation, even if you know they're not in the right state of mind to be making those decisions? That is a complicated question that doesn't have a clear-cut answer. And so I still think there is something to be said for, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but these people have a right to their own agency, and also wiping their memories is bad. That could have been the angle. But it had to be that the experiment was bad, so they had to completely eradicate the experiment, and so this is what she had to come up with to do that, and it just muddles the point so much, to the point where instead of having an overall point that it seems like this book is making, we have a little bit of a point salad about society, where all of the ingredients are technically good, but they kind of conflict with each other, so the whole salad doesn't taste good. Like, yes, discrimination is bad, yes, propaganda is bad, yes, people deserve agency, yes, wiping people's memories is functionally killing them. But the way that you went about trying to talk about all of this conflicts with each other. And so what's the final point? It kind of feels like she ends up just making the point she needs to make in every scene instead of making a big point. So that's part of what I mean when I say I think it needs a central point, because I think that Roth started out with her whys, and I think the whys made perfect sense. And then I think that in trying to just create a villain for that third book, she lost sight of maybe what she was trying to do with the original 2 books. And instead, like I said, we ended up with this point salad where all of the ingredients are technically correct, but they don't really go together. You might think it's unfair for me to compare these works to The Hunger Games, but if we can all admit that something really is the peak, it's the best of the best, then I feel like observing it and talking about what's so good about it is a good idea. Let's look at the Hunger Games' whys. Within the world of the Hunger Games, there is the capital, and then there are 12 districts. The people in the capital live very luxurious lifestyles using materials that are provided to them by the districts. And so we have our why behind why the government does what they do, right? The people in the capital are greedy and they want to have their luxuries. Pretty simple. But what about the games? That directly ties to our second why that we need here, which is why do the people go along with it? The districts themselves are split into small enough groups that if any of them were to revolt in isolation, then it probably wouldn't be enough to actually do any damage to the capital. But not all of them at once. So how do you avoid everybody banding together to fight against you? Well, you have to make them enemies somehow. When I say lower districts here, I mean the lower numbered districts, right? Lower districts have quite a few luxuries of their own, and the people from those districts tend to be a lot better off than the higher numbered districts. And they usually have kids who volunteer to fight in the Hunger Games, so they don't have to worry as much about their children being involuntarily chosen for the games. And amongst those districts, there is the promise of joining the capital if you become wealthy enough within the districts and can buy your way in. And so regardless of if they are ever able to, they are loath to fight against the capital, because what if they are able to become a part of it? You never have to worry about your children, grandchildren, or generations after them getting chosen for the Hunger Games as well, because the capital children don't go to the games. So the higher districts hate the lower districts almost as much as they hate the capital. And in fact, I would argue a little bit more at the beginning of the series, especially because we're viewing this from Katniss's perspective. And so when she's in that first book, she is only really focused on her first games, which makes sense, right? She's gonna fight to the death. She needs to focus on staying alive. And so her main enemies are the careers, and she's very focused on those tributes from those low district numbers because they are the immediate threat to her. She begrudgingly likes a lot of her capital staff as she's going into the games, and she doesn't really view them as complicit in the games happening. And so really a lot of her anger is directed at the careers. So this separates the higher districts from the lower districts and makes sure that they don't like each other. But then there's this question of who kills who from what district, and really the way it ends up playing out is that every district is out for themselves. What if you live in District 8 and your friend went into the games and somebody from 9 killed him that year? Would you feel that positively towards 9? Katniss showing at the end of her Hunger Games that the capital isn't impenetrable, and her gaming it so that her and Peeta both survive is one of the things that she does that sparks this rebellion and is part of why she becomes a symbol. But the other part of it is that she was so kind to Rue. Rue was from District 11, and she and Rue formed an alliance. And when she first formed the alliance with her, there wasn't really a survival reason on Katniss's front why she would do so. She was doing it to protect Rue as much as she could. And when Rue passes, she gives her a proper burial, the best that she can. And because of this, she is gifted bread by District 11. And it's the first time that a tribute is gifted something from another district. I don't remember how long it had been. I don't think it's the first time it had ever happened, but I don't think it matters. It hadn't happened for a very long time. And if you remember, the other tribute from 11 had Katniss trapped and let her go once and says, I'm going to let you go this once for Rue, but next time I'm not going to do it again. This creates a tentative bond between District 12 and District 11 where they are not enemies. The enemy is the games. So Katniss doing this combined with her showing that you can beat the capital, those two things together are what starts to spark the unrest that the already forming rebellion takes advantage of, and that's what the rest of the series plays out over. Anyway, that is why the capital does the Hunger Games. That is the purpose of it. It's not just to be barbaric and cruel, but it makes the districts enemies with each other, and it makes people fearful of their children being selected for the Hunger Games, and all of that is a distraction against the government that not just runs the Hunger Games, but runs a very barbaric society otherwise. The capital is horrible in a lot of other ways, and a lot of people are leading very miserable lives under their rule. The games are the means of control. It is just one of the many barbaric things that they are doing, but they have a reason for doing it. Anyway, I find all three of these book series we've covered so far to be especially fascinating because they all have some kind of barbaric enclosed situation a teenager finds themselves trapped in for most of the first book. But throughout the rest of the series, the games work where the maze and the faction system don't, because the government has a very solid reason for doing the games, where the maze, there really isn't a reason for at all. And the factions, we're given a reason, but then we're told that reason was a lie and propaganda, so why did the government spread that lie and that propaganda? Your guess is as good as mine. It probably has something to do with control. But you might be thinking, Meredith, okay, fine. These worlds don't make sense, but does that really ruin the book? Maybe just suspend your disbelief and enjoy it anyway. But these plot holes, in my opinion, do typically directly lead to the problems that exist within the story. And it lies in the same reason why I don't think dystopian standalones have this problem. Happy endings. How do you defeat a government that doesn't have a good reason for why they're doing what they're doing in the first place? A dystopian standalone doesn't need to, and often doesn't, provide some kind of solution for the dystopia in the story. The story isn't necessarily about overthrowing the government as much as it is some kind of social commentary from the author. And because it's only one book, this doesn't feel cheap to us as a reader, but a series. Imagine reading 3 books of a dystopian series, and then at the end of that third book, the government's still there and that's just how it ends. You would feel so cheated by that. I don't know if it's just a genre expectation thing that the implication of multiple books in a dystopian series is that either the characters escape the society or that they destroy it. And so if you don't get either of those and you don't get your happy ending, then I feel like after 3 books you feel much more cheated than only after 1. And an extra part of the issue for the series we're discussing here today is that they're all young adults. So you need kids to figure out how to overthrow a government that the adults in the story have not figured out how to overthrow. And the government themselves doesn't really have the best reason for why they're doing what they're doing in the first place. And all of a sudden, you can easily see why this doesn't lead to the best literature. In The Maze Runner, Dashner avoids this entirely by just not having the kids be the one to create the safe haven that they're sent to. And it is because the maze makes no sense that they had to do this ending. Bear with me on this. They had this massive maze that was a technological marvel. They had this monsters that they had created themselves for the maze. They had the ability to do all this crazy stuff during the Scorch trials that involved kind of teleporting people and healing a bullet wound within a few days. So Wicked just has this like crazy advanced technology, and they would have had to in order to be able to run both of these experiments the way that they did. What does that do to them as an organization? Within the narrative, I mean. Now I'm turning this into a class. I'm like asking you. I'm expecting you to respond back. Like, what did that do to the story? They're overpowered. The teens never could have defeated them. They had way too much technology, and they had canonically studied these kids so much that they could predict out their behavior to an almost exact amount. So the kids are not going to be able to defeat Wicked in some kind of battle. So there was another organization that came in to kind of help them do the battle part, and that is a way to handle that as well. Still kind of a cheat, but that is a way to handle that. But the only other thing that you can then do, if you can't defeat Wicked with weapons, then the people involved have to have a change of heart. And at this point, they have gone to such ridiculous extents to keep this experiment around and have done increasingly crazier and crazier things and seem hell-bent on never letting it go, to the point where it wouldn't make any sense for any of their characters to have a change of heart. They are way too dedicated. They're way too feral about this experiment. They're never going to let it go. It wouldn't have made sense for them to have been defeated militarily, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to have a change of heart either. So what does he do? He has the leader just create a safe haven that nobody knows about, that she didn't tell anybody about, and just teleport all the kids there at the end of the book. And with Divergent, it genuinely has almost the exact same problems. Triss and friends didn't have the numbers nor the technology to have militarily defeated the Bureau, nor could they have convinced David not to do what he was about to do, because he, similarly to the scientist from The Maze Runner, is so invested in the experiments at that point that he's never going to give it up. That wouldn't make any sense for his character. But instead of having some kind of weird cheat ending, I will at least give Veronica Roth the flowers of she actually just decided to have Triss chemical weapon everybody in the Bureau to functionally kill them. Is it a good way? I obviously don't think so, but it is a way to handle that. She has that over the Maze Runner. She wrote an ending that is tied to the plot of the series. Interestingly enough, Suzanne Collins also kind of does this because the Capitol is very overpowered in the Hunger Games books. So there's District 13, which was never actually defeated by the Capitol, even though they told everybody that it was. And they have been prepping a rebellion for a really long time, and Katniss just joins it. Within the Hunger Games narrative, this gets introduced in the middle of Catching Fire. Whereas in the Maze Runner, it's like at least 40% of the way through book 3 that were introduced to the rebellion against Wicked. The Hunger Games has a lot of the same elements as the Maze Runner and Divergent because the Maze Runner and Divergent all came out in the frenzy of how popular the Hunger Games was, and presumably were trying to mimic that success. So there are a lot of very similar elements between these stories, but they work within the Hunger Games and they don't work within these other books because the other books do not have this fundamental aspect of the dystopia well thought out. And so the pieces end up just feeling like jumbled pieces that fall apart in the end, because if you have a government that doesn't have a reason really for why they're doing what they're doing, and you have a people that aren't revolting really for no reason, then what justifiable reason could you come up with for your main character being the one to free the people? Free the people who aren't revolting for what reason from what? You see what I'm saying? Do you understand the point of this video now? Do you understand what I'm trying to show you? You need this. It's a pivotal element. If you don't have it, the book falls apart. If you don't want to think it through, then don't write a dystopian. I don't know what to tell you. So great, if you want to write a dystopian, just think out these whys and you're all good. Point made. Video over. Hang on, why do I have so much script left? The selection is fascinating to me in relation to these other works because it actually has its whys, but it only has them because it ripped them pretty directly from the Hunger Games, which is fine. I would argue there is enough transformation here that it's not nefarious, it's just clearly inspired. The why behind why the government does what it does and why the people don't revolt is simple, and it works. Within the universe of the selection, there is a caste system, and your caste dictates what your job is. And the lower your number is, the more luxury you live in, and the more wealth you have, and the higher number, the less wealth you have. So it otherwise completely mimics the structure of the districts, but it's just castes instead of districts, and so it's not based on where you live. And then instead of sending kids to fight to the death in the Hunger Games, they send young girls to fight for the heart of the prince in a bachelor-style romance dating show that's broadcast to the entire country. That's not actually how they control the people, to be honest. It is part of it. Anyone from any caste can become the princess, right? But in reality, it's more just the caste system itself. It's very barbaric, but is an effective way to control people because it has the same effect of the districts, right? It separates people out into groups that are much smaller and makes them less likely to band together. Everybody feels grateful that they're not in the castes below them. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to disturb their place in the society as a result. So it just creates this natural animosity in a very similar way. And so just by nature of using a caste system, there is this inherent explanation as to how the government has held power. Again, none of this justifies why governments do this. It just explains it, just to make that very clear. So then why didn't the selection work? And why am I bringing it up in relation to these other books? Isn't my whole point that you need these whys? Yes, to be fair, that was my point. But you also don't just need them to be present. You yourself as the author need to understand them and care about them. And that's what I feel like is missing from the selection. Maybe this is going to be kind of rude to say, and I always just think back to the fact, I know that at least one of my subscribers' moms is like friends with Kira Cass or something. Please do not tell her I said this. I don't think that she cares about this aspect of this book at all. Now you might be thinking, Meredith, you just told us that the premise of the book is that these girls are randomly selected to fight for the heart of the prince in a bachelor-style romance dating show. Why were you expecting it to be serious? This is where I combat the inevitable comments I'm going to get about like sometimes things are just stupid and fun and you don't need to take it that seriously, because the ending of the selection is also terrible and also doesn't work. And I'm not the only person who has that opinion. A lot of people really love this series and really hate the ending of it. And the why behind why it's so terrible lies in this issue, in my opinion. It's just my opinion. The ending of the third selection book very famously features all of the problems taking each other out in like the second to last chapter. So there's a tyrant king that doesn't like America is the name of the main girl. Okay. So when I say America in this section, I mean the human character from this book. Tyrant king, Maxon's dad, who's the love interest, doesn't like America at all, doesn't want her to be princess, and wants to remain a tyrant king, obviously, as tyrant kings are known to want. There is an evil rebellion and a good rebellion, and they happen to break in at the same time, or the good rebellion finds out that the bad rebellion is going to break into the castle. And so then there's this big battle, and the bad rebels are completely taken out, as well as the king and the queen. They all just die in this one battle. And most importantly, America and Maxon are on the rocks. And then Maxon just forgives her because the near-death experience gives him a change of heart. So every piece of conflict is just resolved in one single battle that America isn't even present for because she's ushered to a safe room. What fascinates me about the selection is it really is supposed to be goofy, fun, lighthearted dystopian. The romance is the core of the story, and everything else takes a back seat, including the tyrannical government. The politics is barely mentioned until book 3. And all of a sudden, within book 3, the political side of the equation becomes a much bigger deal. All of a sudden, America is kind of coming into herself politically, and she's navigating some things a little bit with the queens of other countries, and she's getting a little bit more involved in that side of things, and she's talking to some rebels and things, right? She's starting to become much more politically aware and to potentially accept the responsibility of becoming princess and eventually becoming queen and trying to make things better for the people of Ilia is the name of the country. And then at the end, all of the problems take each other out. Why did she do that? Kira Cass, the author. Why is that how it played out? This is the problem right here with trying to use a dystopia as a backdrop to write a goofy, silly book. Because you can't have a romance end all happy and have the dystopia still exist within the story. Oh, isn't it such a cute and fluffy and happy ending? And Maxon and America end up together and they have this beautiful wedding and they're prince and princess. They do still have a caste system. You can't do that. So she has to solve the societal issues, but she doesn't want that to be the core focus of the book. So the societal problems all need to work themselves out, but it'll feel equally as cheap if the king just wakes up one morning and went, you know what, this is barbaric. What if we just stop? So somebody needs to fight him, but it's not going to be America because then I would have to write that. And I don't want to do it. So let's just create multiple issues and then have them take each other out. And then we can all have our happy ending. Maxon's going to be a good king. And I don't need to break down for you in what ways he's going to be a good king. I'm just telling you he's going to be a good king. And they're going to get rid of the castes. And this is a very childish understanding of how this would play out. The idea that any of the other people in power would be okay with Maxon just taking away all of their power and their luxury and using that money to help the people instead. They wouldn't be cool with that. Now, I have not read the sequel series that's about at least one of their kids. Is it about both kids? And I've had some recommendations for it, and I did read the blurb and a few 1-star reviews. It does seem like there is unrest in the society because America and Maxon just got rid of the caste system without really thinking through how they were going to do it, and it caused a bunch of issues, which I think a toddler could have predicted, but that's a retcon. And I told you we weren't taking into account retcons. I have now read the original Selection trilogy twice and have had zero interest after turning the last page of book 3 in picking up book 4. And so I think defending it by saying, well, she fixes that in the next book, and this series really is way more about the romance than it's about the dystopia. And that's fine. That's what she wanted to write. I'm just pointing out to you why it doesn't work. This ridiculous ending was her only option because otherwise she had to end the romance with a happy ending with no solution for the society, which wouldn't have worked. Or she had to actually have America pivotally involved in the dismantling of this government, and that would take doing more social commentary than it seemed like she wanted to do. So again, do you see the point I'm trying to make here? This doesn't work. Sorry, I need to get like a curtain or something I have blinds here, and in the afternoon the sun kind of goes through them. All right, I'm a little further away from you and that seems to have fixed it. So, oh, come on. Ow, oh my God. I have never had that happen. I need hazard pay, guys. Oh my God, it's like sinking. Again, I just come back to the core point that I'm making to you, which is that the issue is that it doesn't really seem like Kiera Cass had any interest in the social commentary aspect of these books. She just wanted the backdrop for the love triangle. But I don't know if it's just because young adult dystopian was so common at the time, and so it made it easier for her to get published, or if she couldn't think of another way to do such a dating show without creating some kind of dystopia, because how would it exist otherwise? I don't know which it was. I do think that the book ends up suffering for it, and that's why the ending feels the way that it does. Maybe I'll change my mind at some point about this part of it specifically. Maybe there is a way to do it a little goofier, a little sillier, a little bit more lighthearted. If you think about the structure of all of these series, Book 1 just centers around a teenager in some kind of enclosed situation, and they're completely focused on that situation. And so all of these authors wrote a good first book for a series. And take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because I have never published myself and I've never worked in publishing, but I believe that the way that it works when you submit a series is that you submit the first manuscript and then you tell the publisher what you want to do with the rest of the series. And that is a very different thing than having all of the books ready, obviously. And so it feels to me like what happened here is both maybe with the publishers and with the masses, Book 1 hit in all of these series because it was just the kid focused on the problem right in front of them, and it didn't have to dig into the rest of it. And that even when you look at the fan reactions, as soon as it expands out into the rest of it, people end up very disappointed with where they go. I also think that that's why dystopian standalones don't have the same problem, not just because they don't have to have a happy ending, but because you have to sell it all as one unit, and so the publisher won't take it if it's that bad, you know? Nobody has to listen to me, I'm just screaming into the void as per usual. I just found the subject very interesting, and I ended up really deep diving into it this week, and I wanted to talk about it, so I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!